Imagine a stone wall whispering secrets centuries old, tales of betrayal and heartbreak etched into its very foundations. What if the chilling ghost stories you've heard about Europe's ancient castles aren't just folklore, but echoes of actual historical events? Welcome to my channel Words of Time, and we're diving deep into the true stories behind the legends. The wind moves through the ruins like a voice trying to speak. The stones, slick with moss and worn by centuries of rain, seem to breathe with memory. At dusk, when the air grows heavy and the light fades over the broken towers, the castle feels alive. The sound of the wind against the hollow windows is almost like a sigh, and one begins to wonder if these walls remember, if they hold on to the things they once witnessed. The clatter of armor in the courtyard, the cries of soldiers, the prayers whispered before dawn sieges. Perhaps they have absorbed every echo, every drop of sorrow that soaked the ground beneath them. This thought sits uneasily with those who stand within such ruins, for it suggests that the past is never fully gone. It lingers in the stones themselves, like a shadow that refuses to lift. Across Europe, castles rise on cliffs, riverbanks, and lonely moors, each a monument to ambition, fear, and survival. They were built not only to defend but to dominate, to show power through permanence. Yet the longer they have stood, the more they have turned into something else entirely. Their walls, once symbols of control, now serve as vessels of memory. The air around them carries centuries of voices, some joyful, most mournful. To walk through one is to walk through layers of time, where each step might stir something that should have remained still. These castles are not silent structures, they are witnesses. The history of these strongholds is soaked in conflict. During the Middle Ages, Europe was torn by power struggles that reshaped kingdoms and ruined dynasties. Each battle left behind not just ruins and relics, but stories that clung to the land. The sieges were long and merciless. Within the walls, people starved, betrayed one another, and faced slow deaths as enemies surrounded them. The stones of a castle were the last things many ever saw. When the fighting ended, the walls stood in eerie quiet, holding the weight of what had happened. Time passed, but those memories did not fade. They twisted into legends, whispered by those who survived and those who came later. In Scotland, for instance, many castles are said to be home to restless spirits. The country's history is marked by betrayal and bloodshed, and its fortresses reflect that pain. The ruins of Edinburgh Castle, perched high upon its volcanic rock, dominate the city below. Its beauty hides its violence. Within those walls, prisoners were tortured, nobles executed, and invaders repelled. The vaults beneath the castle are cold and airless, filled with echoes of chains and distant cries. Some who visit claim to feel unseen hands brush past them, or hear faint footsteps where none should be. It is as though the castle refuses to let go of the people who met their end there. The pattern repeats across the continent. In Germany, France, and Spain, castles built as military outposts or royal residences carry stories that sound less like history and more like confession. The line between what happened and what is imagined blurs. In the heart of the Loire Valley, the once glorious fortresses that housed nobles during the Renaissance now sit quiet, but locals still speak of phantom music drifting through their corridors. The idea that such places are haunted comes not from superstition alone, but from a deep sense of continuity. Every era leaves behind traces that the next must live with. The blood spilled in those halls, the betrayals whispered behind closed doors, the despair of the imprisoned, all of it accumulates. It is not difficult to see why people believe that these stones remember. Unlike other remnants of the past, castles were built to last. They were not meant to crumble, though many have. Their durability turns them into timekeepers, witnesses that cannot forget. And because they cannot speak, their silence invites imagination. Every creak of a wooden door, every gust of wind through an arrow slit becomes a possible message. Visitors fill that silence with meaning, and in doing so, the myths grow stronger. The mind turns history into haunting, and what was once a battlefield becomes a stage for the supernatural. The connection between historical violence and ghostly legend is not accidental. Many of these tales are ways of remembering what might otherwise be too grim to face directly. The ghost of a wronged queen, the shadow of a murdered child, or the echo of a soldier's last cry all serve as symbols of the tragedies that shaped these lands. They make the invisible visible. They allow people to speak about pain that the official records ignore. In that sense, every haunting is a form of history retold, softened by the distance of time, but still carrying the emotional truth of suffering. In castles across Ireland, for example, there are countless stories of women in white. These apparitions, often said to be the spirits of betrayed lovers or murdered wives, wander the corridors and ramparts, mourning what was taken from them. The details differ from one story to another, but the core is always the same: injustice that refuses to rest. Behind the ghostly image is usually a real event, a noble marriage gone wrong, an act of revenge, a political scheme that ended in blood. The folklore does not aim to frighten alone. It preserves what history tends to bury. In England, the Tower of London stands as one of the most famous examples of a place where history and haunting are inseparable. It has witnessed executions, imprisonments, and political intrigue for nearly 1,000 years. Each monarch used it as a tool of power, and those who opposed the throne often met their end within its walls. The beheadings of queens and the torture of prisoners have left such a deep mark that few places feel more haunted. Visitors today often report chills or a sense of being watched, as though the tower still holds the energy of all who died there. It has become a symbol of the darker side of authority, where beauty and brutality coexist. These stories endure because they touch something universal. They remind us that power always has a cost, and that those costs are rarely forgotten by the places that witnessed them. The legends of haunted castles are not just entertainment, they are moral records. They speak to guilt, loss, and the human need to make sense of suffering. When people tell these stories, they are trying to give voice to the silenced, to imagine justice where there was none. Even when the details grow exaggerated, the feeling behind them remains sincere. Architecturally, these fortresses were designed to intimidate. Their towers, moats, and drawbridges were defenses against both invasion and fear. Yet their very design contributes to their mystique. Thick walls muffle sound, narrow corridors twist into darkness, and staircases spiral into shadow. It is easy to believe that something unseen lingers within. The craftsmanship that once ensured survival now creates a setting perfect for legend. Even in daylight, the atmosphere is heavy with memory. At night, it becomes almost tangible. The moonlight catches on the stone, and every corner seems to breathe. As centuries passed, many castles fell into ruin, but their hold on the imagination only grew stronger. Artists, poets, and writers turned them into symbols of the past's grip on the present. Gothic literature in particular drew heavily from these sites, transforming decaying architecture into metaphors for human guilt and fear. The haunted castle became a setting where time stood still and where the sins of the past could not be escaped. This literary tradition helped shape how people perceive real ruins today. When visitors walk through an abandoned fortress, they are not just seeing history. They are experiencing a story that has been told and retold for generations. Archaeologists and historians often find themselves balancing between the factual and the legendary. They dig for evidence of battles and construction, yet they cannot ignore the tales that locals tell. In many cases, folklore leads them to discoveries. A legend about a hidden chamber may turn out to have a basis in truth. A story about a mysterious death might point to real political intrigue. The stones may not literally speak, but they guide inquiry. The legends act as maps of collective memory, directing attention to where history lies buried. The haunting of castles can also be seen as a reflection of the collective conscience. The violence of the medieval world, its wars, executions, and betrayals, left scars that time alone could not heal. When those events fade from formal record, the mind preserves them in symbolic form. Ghosts become the embodiment of historical guilt. They remind communities of the blood that built their walls and the sorrow that came with power. In this way, the legends serve a social function, ensuring that the darker truths of the past are never fully erased. Each region's tales carry distinct tones shaped by its history. In France, many haunted chateaux tell stories of romance and tragedy, echoing the turbulence of royal courts. In Germany, the legends often focus on knights and the curses of broken oaths. In Eastern Europe, where borders shifted and wars repeated, the hauntings speak more of loss and exile. Though the details differ, all share the idea that the stones have absorbed the spirit of what happened around them. The architecture becomes a mirror for the human condition, strong yet fragile, silent yet full of meaning. Visitors today approach these places with curiosity, sometimes with reverence. Tourism has turned haunting into heritage, yet even amid guided tours and photographs, there remains a moment when silence takes hold. Standing in the great hall of a ruined fortress, with only the wind and the distant cry of a bird, one can feel something close to presence. It may be imagination, but it feels real enough. The mind fills the emptiness with echoes. Every stone, every worn step becomes a reminder of how small human lives are in the face of time. The belief that the stones themselves remember is not entirely fanciful. In a way, they do. Every structure carries the marks of those who built, used, and suffered within it. Chemical traces, carvings, stains, and even structural damage hold information. Modern technology can now read some of these traces, residues of fire, blood, or decay. What folklore once described as haunted may, in a scientific sense, be the physical record of trauma. The walls are indeed marked by what they endured, though not by consciousness but by material memory. The poetic truth and the scientific truth meet in the same place. The endurance of these tales also speaks to the human need for continuity. To imagine that the stones remember is to feel that we, too, might be remembered. Our lives are brief compared to the age of castles. The idea that places hold memory offers comfort. It means that nothing is completely lost, that even suffering has a place in the grand story of time. The ghosts, then, are not only warnings, but also symbols of connection. They remind us that the past is never as distant as we think. There is also a beauty in the melancholy of these ruins. The play of light on cracked walls, the stillness of abandoned halls, the sense of absence that feels like presence, all evoke reflection. The haunting is not always fearsome. Sometimes it feels like quiet mourning, as though the stones themselves grieve. The castles stand as both monuments and elegies, their endurance a kind of stubborn hope that even after destruction, something remains. Many legends end not with terror, but with peace. A ghost finally laid to rest, a curse lifted, a forgotten grave honored. These endings suggest reconciliation with history. They imply that remembrance, when done with understanding, can heal. To face what happened, to acknowledge the suffering behind the beauty, is to let the stones rest. The haunted castle becomes not a warning but a teacher, showing how the past can be faced without fear. Yet not all memories want to fade. Some linger because the lessons they hold are not yet learned. The stories of cruelty, betrayal, and ambition still echo in the modern world. When people visit these sites and feel that uneasy chill, perhaps it is not only the ghost of medieval sorrow they sense, but recognition of their own capacity for such acts. The stones become mirrors, reflecting the same struggles that shaped them. Power, greed, love, loss. None of these are confined to the past. The haunting endures because the human story has not changed as much as we like to think. If one stands before the ruins of a castle at dusk, as the last light fades and the first star appears, there is a moment when time seems to bend. The centuries fold together. The ground beneath your feet has absorbed the footsteps of soldiers, servants, kings, and prisoners. The air smells of rain and stone, the same scent that filled these halls hundreds of years ago. You might hear nothing but the wind, yet feel surrounded by presence. It is not superstition but empathy, a recognition that every human act leaves a trace, and that those traces, gathered over generations, form the quiet soul of a place. The castles of Europe, with their crumbling walls and soaring towers, hold within them a tapestry of memory that no written record can fully capture. They are museums not just of artifacts, but of emotion. Their stones bear witness to glory and ruin alike. They have seen love declared and lives ended. They have echoed with music and with screams. To call them haunted is to admit that history is not dead. It breathes, whispers, and waits to be heard. The legends that cling to these places are, in truth, expressions of reverence. They grant personality to the inanimate, giving voice to what endures when people are gone. Through them, the castles continue to speak. They tell us that beauty can coexist with tragedy, that power always carries a shadow, and that memory, even when painful, is worth keeping. They remind us that every stone once touched by human hands carries more than weight, it carries story. Whether one believes in ghosts or not matters little. What matters is the recognition that places remember in their own way. The haunted castle, standing against the horizon, is both a ruin and a record. Its silence is not emptiness but testimony. The past may be gone, but it is not lost. It lives in the stones that built our world, and in the stories that keep them alive. The belief that stone can hold memory leads naturally to the darker question of what happens when those memories come from blood. If a castle can carry whispers of love and loyalty, it can also bear the weight of violence. When people speak of haunted fortresses and cursed ruins, they are not only telling ghost stories. They are interpreting history through feeling. Behind every legend of a wandering spirit or cursed chamber lies an event so charged with pain that the mind insists it cannot have ended. The past, in these cases, does not sleep. It seeps through the cracks like moisture, staining the walls. To understand this, one can turn to the many castles of Europe whose histories read like confessions written in stone. Some ruins are so marked by suffering that they seem to breathe with it. The line between folklore and fact blurs, but the roots of each legend usually reach deep into the soil of history. Real events, betrayals, massacres, and sieges gave rise to hauntings that endure through centuries. These are not random tales created to entertain. They are emotional translations of trauma. The walls are said to bleed not because people wish them to, but because they once did. One example of this blending of the real and the spectral is the enduring legend of the Black Aggie at Edinburgh Castle. Visitors and locals alike have long spoken of a faint, sulphurous scent that appears on cold nights near the old guardhouse, a smell said to come from rituals performed in secret centuries ago. The story goes that during a period of unrest, alchemists and soldiers alike sought to summon forces beyond their understanding, leaving behind not treasure but a curse. The air around those stones is often heavy and metallic, and those who spend time there sometimes describe dizziness or unease. Whether it is the scent of ancient fires, trapped moisture, or simply suggestion, it has become an invisible relic of human desperation. The castle itself has seen enough real suffering to justify any haunting. It held prisoners during wars, tortured captives for information, and stood as both fortress and grave. The Black Aggie is said to appear when the sulfur stench grows strongest, a shadowed figure in tattered robes, her face hidden, her presence marking the lingering stain of human cruelty. The connection between tragedy and haunting becomes even clearer at Leap Castle in Ireland, often called the most haunted fortress in the country. Its legends are inseparable from its history of betrayal and bloodshed. During the turbulent clan conflicts of the 16th century, the O'Carroll family turned the castle into both home and battlefield. Power within the clan was fiercely contested, and during a mass held in the chapel, one brother murdered another, striking him down at the altar in front of his kin. From that moment, the chapel became known as the Bloody Chapel. Over time, more killings followed, each feeding the air with fear and grief. Centuries later, workers uncovering parts of the castle found a pit filled with human bones, evidence of long-forgotten executions. It is said that from this well of suffering came an entity known simply as the Elemental. Witnesses describe it not as a ghostly figure, but as a physical presence, something small, hunched, and foul-smelling, its arrival always announced by the stench of rot and decay. Some believe it represents the concentrated energy of all the pain that took place in those walls, while others think it is a spirit bound by a curse older than the castle itself. What makes Leap Castle so haunting is not merely the tales of spirits, but the undeniable reality of violence that shaped its past. The elemental may be imagination's way of processing something too horrific to comprehend. The odor, the cold air, the sense of pressure, all of it might be psychological, yet it feels earned. The stories arise because the history demands them. The connection between emotional trauma and physical space appears again and again across Europe's ruins. Corfe Castle in England, for instance, is remembered not only for its strategic significance, but for the terrible siege it endured in the early 14th century. The defenders were outnumbered, starving, and betrayed from within. The mistress of the castle, Lady Mary Banks, led her garrison with courage, repelling assault after assault. But when the betrayal came, it was from one of her own soldiers who opened the gates to the enemy. The invaders poured in, slaughtering those who resisted. Some accounts say that when the siege ended, the castle walls were soaked in blood, and Lady Mary watched as her people were executed. Though she herself survived, the destruction of her home and the betrayal that caused it became legend. In the centuries that followed, travelers spoke of the sound of weeping near the broken walls and of faint cries carried by the wind. Even now, some say they feel an unshakable sorrow there, as though the land itself remembers the siege. The stones, darkened by time and weather, seem to bear invisible stains. There are no reliable records of ghosts at Corfe Castle, but the emotional truth of its history has kept its memory alive in the form of unease. People visit to see ruins, yet they often leave speaking about the atmosphere, that peculiar heaviness that feels like mourning. It is as if the betrayal of long ago still clings to the site, unwilling to fade. The same pattern appears in countless other places. Each haunting, each legend of bleeding walls or phantom cries can be traced back to some moment of despair. Winchester Castle in southern England carries one of the most sorrowful examples in the tragic story of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Once a queen, a duchess, and among the most powerful women of her time, she spent part of her life confined, her freedom taken by her own husband, King Henry II. Though she died peacefully in the end, the years of captivity at Winchester left a shadow. Visitors have long claimed that her spirit lingers, wandering the corridors she once paced in silence. Her ghost, they say, is not frightening but solemn. The air in certain rooms is colder, quieter, and the sound of fabric brushing stone has been heard when no one is near. Her haunting, if it is one, feels less like punishment than endurance, the echo of a woman who refused to vanish into history's silence. The repeated link between suffering and haunting suggests something deeply human. We project memory onto place because we cannot bear for the past to disappear entirely. A battlefield without ghosts would feel incomplete. A castle without echoes would seem unnatural. These places were once filled with people whose emotions were intense enough to shake the air: terror, rage, love, guilt. The physical environment absorbed those vibrations, and now, centuries later, we interpret the faint traces of those feelings as hauntings. Science may explain them as drafts, temperature changes, or tricks of sound, but that does not erase their emotional truth. The stories exist because they answer a need, to make sense of how horror lingers long after the acts themselves have ended. The notion of bleeding walls appears in many castle legends, symbolizing the fusion of history and horror. At times, the image is literal, such as the reports of reddish stains that seem to seep from the stones at certain Scottish and Irish ruins. These stains, likely from mineral deposits or natural runoff, acquire supernatural meaning when connected to stories of massacre. The human mind, seeing color that recalls blood, instinctively fills in the narrative. Once a place has been associated with death, everything within it begins to echo that association. Even the smell of damp earth becomes the scent of decay, and every gust of wind carries imagined cries. But these interpretations also reveal a kind of reverence. People do not invent hauntings out of mockery, but out of respect, even fear, of what came before. The ghosts are acknowledgments that something sacred, or at least significant, happened here. In this way, the legends preserve memory more effectively than many written histories. They keep emotion alive where facts might fade. When one stands in the bloody chapel of Leap Castle and feels that cold, acrid smell, one does not need a historian to explain the weight of the past. The atmosphere itself becomes the teacher. These haunting tales also show how intertwined religion, superstition, and human conscience were in medieval life. When tragedy struck, people sought meaning in the unseen. A massacre was not only a political act but a moral rupture, and that rupture demanded balance. Spirits and curses became the explanation for why certain places felt tainted. The belief in restless souls was less about fear of the dead and more about guilt of the living. If a murder occurred, justice had to be seen, even if only through the belief that the murderer would be haunted forever. The landscape became a moral record, and castles served as the pages upon which those lessons were written. The more brutal the event, the stronger the haunting seemed to be. During sieges, both defenders and attackers lived in terror. Hunger, disease, and despair filled every corner of the fortress. The very air became heavy with it. When such intense emotions are bound to a place, it is easy for later generations to sense something there. Archaeologists might find bones and broken weapons, while storytellers find voices. Each perspective reveals a different truth about the same experience. The stones do not speak with words, but through the feelings they provoke. Even in more modern times, this sense of presence persists. Restoration workers and visitors often report odd experiences. Footsteps where none should be, sudden chills, the faint scent of smoke or blood. Rational explanations exist for each, yet the cumulative effect creates conviction. Those who spend time in these places come to feel that something remains. Whether that something is a spirit, a residue of energy, or simply the weight of memory, it becomes undeniable. The difference between belief and disbelief grows thin when one is standing alone in a shadowed corridor built hundreds of years ago. What makes these haunted histories powerful is not proof but persistence. Generations keep repeating the stories, keeping the connection alive. The Black Aggie of Edinburgh, the Elemental of Leap, the Mourning Queen of Winchester. Each represents a different way of confronting the same truth, that suffering leaves a trace. It might not be measurable, but it is felt. These tales remind us that progress does not erase the past, it builds upon it, layer by layer. Beneath the polished surfaces of modern Europe lie centuries of pain absorbed into the foundations. The bleeding walls of legend are, in essence, symbols of how humanity confronts its own cruelty. The castles that inspire such stories are monuments to ambition and violence, but also to endurance. They remind us that horror and beauty often coexist. A place can be magnificent by day and terrifying by night, just as people can be noble and brutal within the same lifetime. The walls that once protected can also imprison, and the stones that sheltered families can bear witness to murder. The ghosts, real or imagined, are the continuation of that duality. Even today, new interpretations of these hauntings arise. Psychologists describe them as projections of collective guilt. Historians see them as tools for preserving oral tradition. Artists and filmmakers transform them into metaphors for trauma. Each retelling reshapes the meaning without erasing the core truth. Something happened here that refuses to die. When visitors walk through a ruin and feel a sudden chill, it is not just air, it is connection. They are standing in the same space where others once suffered, and for a moment, time folds. What gives these legends their endurance is the human desire to give form to the unseen. The smell of sulfur at Edinburgh, the stench before the elemental's appearance at Leap, the echoes of siege at Corfe, all are sensory bridges between past and present. They transform history into experience. Even when stripped of supernatural belief, these phenomena still hold power. They are evidence of the human need to remember, to make meaning of suffering, and to keep history alive through feeling. In that sense, the haunted castles of Europe are less about fear than about continuity. They show how the past seeps into the present through the cracks of architecture and imagination alike. Each story, each whisper, each chill in the air is a reminder that history never truly ends. The stones do not forget, and neither do we. As the night deepens around those ruins and the wind brushes against the old battlements, it becomes easier to understand why people hear voices or smell sulfur. The mind, sensitive to place and story, fills silence with echoes. Yet those echoes carry something honest. They are not inventions, but interpretations of truth. The legends of bleeding walls and restless spirits are the emotional vocabulary of remembrance. When one leaves such a place, be it Edinburgh's volcanic heights, the haunted corridors of Leap, or the broken remains of Corfe, the feeling lingers. The air seems denser, the memory sharper. You realize that what haunts these places is not death alone, but life refusing to fade. The stones that watched kings rise and fall, that absorbed the cries of the betrayed and the innocent, still stand. Their endurance is testimony enough. Whether ghosts exist is beside the point. What matters is that the walls remember, and through them, so do we. Power has always carried a shadow, and within the walls of Europe's castles, that shadow often takes form. Where ambition ruled, betrayal followed. Where crowns were won and lost, blood was shed, and the echo of that blood still seems to move through the corridors centuries later. The haunting of kings, queens, and nobles is not simply a matter of ghostly rumor. It is the natural consequence of power's cruelty. The same walls that witnessed royal triumphs also absorbed cries of fear, regret, and rage. The legends that endure about royal specters are not only tales of the supernatural, but reflections of the human hunger for power and the devastation it leaves behind. Every castle that once held a throne or a cell for a fallen monarch seems to carry the same rhythm of history: rise, betrayal, execution, haunting. The royal dead do not rest quietly. Their stories are too charged with injustice and ambition to fade. Whether they appear as pale figures in moonlight or as whispers that pass through stone, they embody what happens when human desire outlives the body. The ghosts of royalty are different from common hauntings. They are not merely the echoes of individual sorrow, but the manifestations of political struggle and moral consequence. Perhaps no figure better illustrates this than Anne Boleyn. Her name is inseparable from the Tower of London, that monument to both majesty and death. She entered the tower first as a queen-to-be, the chosen love of Henry VIII, and later as a condemned woman. Her rise had been extraordinary, a lady of the court who captivated a king and changed the course of English religion and politics. But her fall was faster still. Accused of treason, adultery, and even witchcraft, she was tried on charges that were almost certainly fabricated. When she was led to her execution within the tower's walls, she maintained a calm dignity, forgiving those who condemned her. Yet the injustice of her death has never faded from the place that witnessed it. For centuries, witnesses have claimed to see her ghost walking the tower's corridors, her head carried in her hands, or drifting silently near the chapel where she is buried. Guards have reported cold air, sudden lights, and the faint sound of sobbing near the site of her execution. Even those who do not believe in ghosts acknowledge that her story lingers with an intensity few others match. The tower itself seems to remember her, its ancient stones marked by the drama of her rise and fall. Her haunting is not merely a spectral event, but a symbol, the price of royal ambition and the cruelty of absolute power. Her presence, imagined or felt, stands as an accusation against the very system that destroyed her. Mary, Queen of Scots, embodies another kind of haunting, one shaped by exile, imprisonment, and betrayal. Born into a turbulent age, she ruled Scotland at a time when faith and politics tore nations apart. Her life was marked by tragedy from the beginning. Widowed young, driven from her throne, and finally imprisoned by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I of England. Her beauty, intelligence, and charm made her both admired and feared. To some, she was a rightful queen and martyr. To others, a dangerous rival whose death was necessary for stability. When she was executed at Fotheringham Castle after years of captivity, witnesses reported that the scene was both solemn and horrifying. Her executioner took more than one blow to sever her head, and as her body was lifted, her small dog ran from beneath her skirts, soaked in her blood. The moment was so grotesque and symbolic that it seemed destined to live forever. And it has. Today, those who visit Fotheringham or Edinburgh Castle, where she once stayed, often speak of feeling watched, of hearing faint footsteps, or of seeing a woman in mourning attire passing through locked doors. Some describe a sudden scent of roses, said to be Mary's favorite, appearing where no flowers grow. Her ghost, like in Bullen's, does not seem vengeful but sorrowful, a reminder of a life undone by power and fear. Both queens were victims of political machinations they could not escape, and their hauntings have become lessons written in air and shadow. The legends of royal ghosts across Europe share this same pattern of tragedy and reflection. Kings and queens who schemed for dominance or suffered betrayal now serve as spectral witnesses to the cost of their actions. In France, the restless spirits of the Palace of Versailles are said to appear to those who walk its halls at night. The most famous of these is the figure of Marie Antoinette, whose reign ended at the guillotine during the Revolution. She has been seen near the Petit Trianon, the retreat where she sought refuge from the pressures of court life. Visitors have described her presence as calm, even wistful, as though she is revisiting the only place where she once found peace. The contrast between her lavish life and violent death mirrors the tension of all royal hauntings, the thin line between luxury and loss. In Scotland, Stirling Castle and Holyrood House carry tales of royal ghosts tied to centuries of conflict. The Pink Lady, said to haunt Stirling, is thought to be a noblewoman searching for a lost love, perhaps one killed during the Wars of Independence. At Holyrood House, the shadow of David Rizzio, Mary Queen of Scots' murdered secretary, is said to linger. He was dragged from her chambers and stabbed repeatedly by her jealous husband, Lord Darnley. Bloodstains, they say, still mark the floor, though history insists they have long been scrubbed away. The haunting, real or imagined, keeps that moment alive, a warning of how personal emotions can destroy empires. What makes these royal hauntings particularly powerful is that they mirror the politics that created them. The ghosts are not simply victims or villains. They are reflections of systems built on greed, control, and fear. Every time a monarch rose by betrayal, another story of unrest began. The castles that once symbolized absolute authority now serve as reminders of its fragility. The voices that once commanded armies are now whispers in the wind. The persistence of these stories reveals a truth about human memory. People do not merely want to know what happened. They want to feel why it mattered. Ghosts offer that feeling. They allow the past to breathe. When we speak of Anne Boleyn walking the tower or Mary at Fotheringham, we are acknowledging injustice in a way that pure history often cannot. The supernatural transforms cold fact into living emotion. The haunting becomes a moral commentary. It is no coincidence that most royal hauntings involve women. The history of monarchy is filled with queens who suffered for politics they did not control. Their stories blend tragedy and defiance, love and betrayal. These women were often silenced in life, but in death they speak. Their ghosts, seen or imagined, claim the voice denied to them. In haunting the places of their suffering, they refuse to be erased by the men who condemned them. The image of Anne Boleyn carrying her head, or of Mary wandering in white, is haunting not only because it defies nature, but because it restores justice through symbolism. The guilty may have escaped punishment in life, but the haunting ensures they are never forgotten. Every generation that retells these stories renews that sense of moral reckoning. The castle becomes a courtroom of memory, where history continues its trial. Other royal ghosts carry different lessons. In Prague Castle, the restless presence of a former alchemist is said to appear in the old laboratories where Emperor Rudolf II once sought the secrets of eternal life. The emperor's obsession with power through knowledge mirrors the ambitions that destroyed so many rulers. His court, filled with mystics and dreamers, became a place where science and superstition blurred. The haunting there is quieter, less personal, but it serves the same purpose. It exposes the vanity of rulers who believed they could command not only men but nature itself. In France, the Louvre was once a royal palace before becoming a museum, and even now, guards report strange sights in its galleries. The Red Man of the Tuileries, believed to be an omen of royal death, was seen before the fall of several monarchs. The color red, echoing blood and power, captures the dual nature of sovereignty, grandeur balanced by peril. Every ghostly sighting in that palace seems to echo the same truth, that thrones are fragile, and that history remembers not only triumphs but also betrayals. The haunting of royalty also extends beyond individuals to entire dynasties. The Plantagenets, the Tudors, the Stuarts, all are said to linger in the places that define them. These ghosts represent not just personal tragedies, but the collapse of entire orders. They remind us that empires, no matter how mighty, are built on the same unstable foundation of human ambition. The power struggles that consumed those families did not end with death. They echo through the architecture, carried forward by memory and imagination alike. Even in modern times, the fascination with royal ghosts continues because their stories feel timeless. They remind us that politics, for all its changes, still carries the same moral questions. How far will someone go to hold power? What does it cost to betray, to execute, to silence? The legends of Anne, Mary, and others remain relevant not because people still fear ghosts, but because they still recognize ambition's price. The haunting becomes a way to talk about ethics in the language of myth. There is something almost poetic in the idea that power cannot escape accountability, even after death. The haunted castles of kings and queens serve as a kind of eternal reckoning. The laughter, deceit, and cruelty once echoed within those walls, and now, in the silence, the consequences speak. Every flicker of shadow or chill of air becomes a reminder that authority has limits. The higher the throne, the longer the fall, and the deeper the echo that follows. And Boleyn's haunting at the Tower of London captures this idea perfectly. The same structure that symbolized the monarchy's strength became the place where it revealed its fear. The tower has been home to many ghosts, but hers remains the most enduring because her story exposes both the beauty and brutality of royal life. She changed the course of history, yet her legacy is bound not to her triumphs, but to her execution. The haunting ensures that the injustice of that act remains visible. It is history's way of refusing to look away. Similarly, Mary Queen of Scots embodies the loneliness of power. Her life was consumed by politics she could not control, and her death was justified in the name of stability. Yet her ghost, appearing in places of confinement, reflects the tragedy of leadership that demands sacrifice without mercy. The roses that announce her presence are not a warning but a remembrance, a quiet acknowledgement that even in the ruthless world of monarchy, humanity endures. These stories endure because they speak to the tension between control and conscience. The castles that once projected authority now provoke introspection. Their ghosts remind us that history is not just a record of winners, but a collection of unresolved questions. Every haunted corridor asks whether justice was ever truly done. The figures who walk there, headless or sorrowful, embody the price of forgetting. As centuries pass, the political systems change, but the dynamics of power remain strikingly similar. Leaders still rise through ambition and fall through betrayal. The names have changed, but the echoes persist. That is why the legends of royal ghosts still resonate. They are not relics of a superstitious past, but mirrors held up to the present. In a world still driven by authority and ambition, the haunting of power continues, only now in different forms: rumors, scandals, and the quiet burden of conscience. The royal ghosts of Europe are not simply remnants of old folklore, they are moral witnesses. They linger because they still have something to say. Their stories blend beauty, tragedy, and warning in equal measure. To walk through the Tower of London or the ruins of Fotheringhay is to feel that presence, not as fear, but as understanding. The air itself seems to say that power is fleeting, but its consequences are not. In the silence of night, when the tourists have gone and the city lights fade, those ancient castles return to themselves. The stones breathe out the memories they hold. Perhaps Anne Boleyn still walks, serene and unbroken, her head cradled not in despair but in defiance. Perhaps Mary still moves through the air heavy with roses, forgiving yet unresolved. Their stories, carried on whispers and wind, are not merely ghost tales but acts of remembrance. They remind us that power without conscience breeds ghosts, and that history never releases those who wielded it carelessly. The royal hauntings of Europe serve as a dialogue between past and present. They show that every throne, no matter how high, casts a shadow. Within that shadow live the echoes of those who paid the ultimate price for ambition. The castles that once held power now hold memory, and in their dim halls, one can almost hear the faint, unending refrain of history itself. Power fades, but the sorrow it leaves behind never does. Beneath the elegance and grandeur of Europe's castles lies a world that was never meant to be seen. Behind the thick stone walls and beneath the polished halls were chambers of agony and silence, places where light rarely reached, and where cries once echoed without mercy. These underground rooms, hidden from the gaze of nobility and visitors, held the true weight of power's cruelty. In the dungeons, the illusion of chivalry vanished. Here, the language of command was replaced by chains and iron, and the authority of kings and lords was written not in law but in suffering. It is within these depths that some of the most disturbing legends were born, and even in the modern day, those whispers of pain still linger. The dungeons of old castles were not merely prisons, they were instruments of control. To be cast into one was not simply to lose freedom, but to lose the sense of self. The air was heavy, damp, and filled with the scent of decay. Many of those imprisoned there never saw daylight again. Time itself became distorted in the darkness, and despair took on a physical form. It is no wonder that centuries later, visitors claimed to feel presences in these spaces. A cold breath on the neck, a shiver without cause, a sound that should not exist. The torment once contained within these walls may have faded from sight, but it has not been forgotten. One of the most haunting examples of such a place is Chillingham Castle in Northumberland, England. Its name alone suggests unease, and for good reason. The castle's history stretches back to the medieval period, a time marked by war, political tension, and ruthless punishment. The dungeons beneath Chillingham are infamous, said to have witnessed the suffering of countless prisoners, including Scottish Covenanters captured during the long conflicts between England and Scotland. These men were held in filth and darkness, starved, and subjected to tortures designed to extract not truth but submission. The torture chamber of Chillingham still contains the instruments once used: racks, cages, iron spikes, and devices meant to stretch or pierce the body. Guides today describe them with clinical precision, but the atmosphere of the room needs no embellishment. The air feels thicker, colder, as if the very stones are saturated with the memory of pain. It is in this same chamber that visitors have reported strange phenomena: unexplained drops in temperature, faint groans, and the fleeting image of a pale figure that drifts along the edge of vision. Among the castle's most persistent legends is that of the White Pantry Ghost. The story tells of a figure dressed in white who appears near the old pantry, often seen weeping or whispering as if begging for water. Some say she was a servant who was poisoned while stealing food for herself. Others believe she is the spirit of one of the starving prisoners who once pleaded for mercy from their captors. Regardless of her origin, her presence is said to bring an overwhelming sadness rather than fear. Those who have encountered her often describe a feeling of empathy rather than dread, a connection to suffering that transcends time. This emotional imprint seems to define the hauntings of dungeons across Europe. The spirits that remain in these subterranean spaces are rarely vengeful in the traditional sense. They are weary, fragmented echoes of lives that ended in hopelessness. In these chambers, the walls were close, the air still, and the mind's last thoughts filled with fear. The idea that such energy could persist is not hard to imagine. The same stones that absorbed the screams of the condemned still exist, unchanged. The iron rings in the walls, the narrow slits of air, the smell of earth and rust. all act as physical reminders of the human agony once endured there. Warwick Castle, in central England, offers another grim example. While today it stands as one of the country's most visited heritage sites, admired for its architecture and pageantry, beneath its grandeur lies a darkness that is easy to overlook. Deep below the surface lies an oubliette, a word derived from the French term meaning to forget. It was a fitting name, for those thrown into these pits were meant to vanish from memory. The oubliette was often a narrow vertical shaft, wide enough only for a single body, with no exit and little air. Prisoners were lowered into it and left to starve, unseen and unheard. Some were forgotten for days before death, others for weeks. Standing near the entrance of Warwick's oubliette, one can still feel the suffocating weight of the space. It is not simply the architecture that creates unease, but the history it represents. The very concept of an oubliette reveals the darkest instinct of authority, the power to erase a person entirely. Tales of moaning and whispers have long surrounded the chamber, said to come from those who died within. Visitors who lean too close to its mouth sometimes claim to feel a rush of cold air or hear faint breathing. Whether such experiences are born of imagination or something more, they testify to how deeply the human mind responds to the presence of forgotten suffering. The dungeons of castles like these were both physical and psychological weapons. They reminded everyone, noble and commoner alike, that defiance had consequences. In times of war or political unrest, they filled quickly with prisoners of conscience, spies, and even ordinary peasants accused of minor offenses. Each cell carried its own story. Some prisoners scratched messages into the stone to mark their existence. Others left bloodstains that no cleaning could erase. Every mark, every trace, contributed to the growing myth of places haunted not by ghosts alone, but by guilt. Such guilt was not confined to those who suffered. It clung also to those who inflicted suffering. Executioners, jailers, and lords who sanctioned torture were haunted in their own ways. Records tell of guards refusing to enter certain cells alone, claiming to hear scratching or sobbing long after the prisoners were gone. A few wrote of dreams in which their victims stood beside their beds, silent and unblinking. The haunting, then, was not only of place but of conscience. The crimes committed within those walls did not end when the victims died. They lived on in the memories of those who participated, echoing through generations. In Scotland, many castles carry similar legacies. The fortress of Stirling, which once served as both palace and prison, is said to harbor the spirits of soldiers and captives alike. The underground chambers there were known for their dampness and suffocating air, conditions that drove prisoners to madness. Even after centuries, visitors report an oppressive sense of dread when descending into those depths. The mind seems to anticipate the fear that others must have felt there, as though it remembers through empathy what history has recorded through fact. The psychological power of these places is undeniable. Even without belief in the supernatural, one can sense that they hold something unresolved. The blend of architecture, history, and emotion creates an atmosphere that defies logic. Each corridor feels too narrow, each step downward too final. The chill in the air is not merely the product of stone and earth, but of expectation. The human imagination fills the silence with sound, turning faint echoes into voices and drafts into breath. Yet these responses reveal an important truth. The past continues to speak, even if only through suggestion. Chillingham, Warwick, Stirling. Each serves as a reminder that the beauty of a castle is only half its story. The splendor of the great halls depended on the suffering in the basements below. Power demanded punishment, and punishment left marks. These marks became legends, and the legends became history's way of remembering what was done in darkness. When visitors today explore these sites with curiosity or thrill, they are also walking through the residue of centuries of pain. The laughter of tourists above ground cannot fully drown out the murmurs beneath. The legends tied to dungeons are among the most persistent because they address the most universal of fears: confinement, helplessness, and abandonment. Unlike the hauntings of royal chambers or battlefields, these stories are not about pride or revenge, but about loss of humanity itself. The souls said to linger in oubliettes and torture chambers are those who were denied even the dignity of a proper death. Their ghosts, whether literal or metaphorical, represent the memory of those forgotten by time. In this way, the hauntings act as a form of justice, a demand that we remember what cruelty once looked like. In the modern world, where the idea of such punishment seems distant, these places still hold power. Visitors in the year 2025 stand where prisoners once knelt, and though centuries have passed, the sense of presence remains. Technology and reason may explain away the paranormal, but they cannot erase empathy. When one steps into the cold of a dungeon, feeling the damp stone and the faint echo of dripping water, imagination does the rest. It rebuilds the world that once existed there. The flicker of torches, the rattle of chains, the muffled cries that fade into silence. The experience is not mere curiosity. It is an encounter with the emotional memory of humanity's darker past. The persistence of these legends suggests that they serve a purpose beyond fright. They function as moral reminders. The ghosts of the dungeons warn against forgetting the ease with which cruelty can be justified in the name of power. Each story of a weeping apparition or a restless sigh beneath the earth speaks not just of suffering endured, but of responsibility ignored. The haunting of Chillingham's White Pantry ghost or the moans beneath Warwick's oubliette are echoes of conscience, urging those who hear them to recognize what civilization too often hides. In every era, societies have sought ways to conceal their brutality behind walls, whether of stone or secrecy. The medieval dungeon was only one form of that concealment. Today, the structures may differ, but the impulse remains to hide the suffering that sustains authority. The legends of castle hauntings survive precisely because they resist that forgetting. They keep visible what history tries to smooth over. In this sense, the ghosts of the dungeons are guardians of truth, however uncomfortable that truth may be. The experience of standing in these ancient spaces forces reflection. The smell of damp air, the narrowness of the corridors, the cold that seeps through skin, all combine to remind visitors that these were not stories but realities. The haunting, whether imagined or real, draws its strength from the knowledge that what happened here was human. The torture devices displayed as relics were once tools of fear. The walls that now fascinate were once barriers to hope. By preserving these sites, society confronts its own history of violence. The stories told about them, of ghosts, whispers, and unseen presences, become ways to engage with that history emotionally as well as intellectually. In Chillingham, guides sometimes end their tours by inviting visitors to stand silently for a moment in the torture chamber. The lights dim, and the only sound is the steady breathing of those present. In that silence, imagination begins to work. A creak, a draft, a faint sound from somewhere deep below. Each detail becomes charged with possibility. Some leave convinced they have felt something supernatural. Others leave shaken by the sheer weight of the place. Regardless of belief, all leave with the same awareness that the boundary between history and haunting is very thin. Similar experiences occur in other castles across Europe. In Germany's Burg Wolf's Egg, stories of a murdered noblewoman's cries echo through underground passageways. In France, the Château de Chateaubriand is said to host the ghost of Françoise de Foix, who was allegedly imprisoned and poisoned by her jealous husband. These tales, like those of Chillingham and Warwick, are not random inventions. They arise from the same emotional landscape, the recognition that power, when unchecked, always leaves a stain. The spirits that haunt these dungeons are not monsters but memories, reminders that the pursuit of control can strip away compassion until nothing remains but regret. The modern fascination with these places reflects a deeper human need to face the parts of our past that remain unresolved. Visitors may arrive seeking thrill, but what they encounter is empathy. Standing where others once suffered, they become witnesses to history's unseen cost. The ghosts, whether real or imagined, perform a vital role by transforming historical fact into emotional truth. They ensure that the pain of the forgotten is not lost in the comfort of the present. As centuries turn and technology advances, the physical structures of castles will continue to erode, but their legends will not. The stones may crumble, yet the stories cling like shadows. The whispers from the dungeons remind us that civilization is built upon layers of both triumph and cruelty. To acknowledge the ghosts of these places is to admit that progress and brutality often share the same walls. In that admission lies understanding. In the quiet after a tour ends and the lights fade, the castle falls silent again. The air grows still, and the chill returns. Perhaps somewhere beneath Chillingham, a faint sigh stirs, or a drop of water falls into darkness. It is easy to imagine that a fragment of the past has spoken. Whether it is a ghost or the echo of memory hardly matters. What matters is that the presence is felt, that history breathes, that the walls remember. These are not simply tales of horror. They are the conscience of the past whispering to the present, urging it not to forget what lies beneath its own foundations. As the echoes from the dungeons fade, they give way to a quieter but no less powerful sound, the murmur of memory that refuses to die. The legends that rise from Europe's ancient castles endure not only because they frighten or fascinate, but because they speak to something deep within the human condition. Long after the instruments of torture have rusted and the torches have burned out, the stories remain, persistent as breath in cold air. In an age of logic, light, and digital certainty, they still find a home in the collective imagination. Even now, in the year 2025, we find ourselves drawn back to these stone corridors and haunted halls, searching for something that reason alone cannot satisfy. The persistence of these tales reveals more about humanity than it does about the buildings themselves. People have always sought meaning in mystery. When we stand before a ruin, we do not see just stone and history. We see evidence of what once was, what might have been, and what perhaps still lingers. Castles, in particular, embody this dual nature. They are both symbols of strength and monuments to suffering. Their grandeur tells the story of ambition, but their shadows speak of cruelty. This contrast gives rise to the kind of legends that refuse to fade. They balance between awe and fear, inviting us to reflect on the moral and emotional complexities of the past. In every century, human beings have told ghost stories to make sense of what they could not fully understand. Before science offered explanations for strange sounds or sudden chills, people turned to the supernatural to fill in the gaps. Yet even now, when those explanations are readily available, the appeal of the unexplained remains. The ghost stories tied to Europe's castles thrive not because people truly believe in them, but because they offer a way to feel history rather than just learn it. A haunted castle is not merely an old structure. It is history that breathes, that speaks in whispers, that reaches through time to touch the imagination. The endurance of these legends also has much to do with the emotional truth they carry. Every haunting, whether of a queen wronged or a prisoner forgotten, reflects a part of the human experience that never changes. Love, betrayal, guilt, ambition, and regret. When we hear of Anne Boleyn's restless spirit pacing the Tower of London, we are not just hearing about a ghost. We are confronting the enduring themes of power and injustice. When visitors describe the sorrow of Chillingham's White Pantry ghost, they are responding to the timeless pain of loneliness and despair. These stories survive because they transform history's cold facts into something we can feel. Our modern world may seem far removed from the brutality that created these tales, but the emotions behind them remain the same. We still struggle with ambition, betrayal, and loss. We still fear being forgotten or misunderstood. The castles and their ghosts remind us that the human condition has not changed as much as our surroundings have. In an era defined by speed and technology, these old stories slow us down. They invite reflection, urging us to remember that progress has not erased the darker corners of our nature. The ghosts are not relics of superstition, they are mirrors. Cultural fascination with the haunted and the historical has only grown stronger in recent years. Television series, films, and online communities thrive on retelling old legends in new forms. The success of historical dramas, true crime documentaries, and paranormal investigations shows how deeply people crave connection with the past. The mixture of fact and folklore offers both education and escape. Viewers may come for entertainment, but they stay because these stories resonate on a psychological level. They remind us that behind every event in history lies a human story, often tragic, always compelling. In 2025, the digital age allows us to explore history in ways our ancestors never could. High-resolution scans of manuscripts, virtual tours of castles, and social media platforms that share historical curiosities bring the past into the palm of our hands. Yet even with all this access, the emotional distance between us and history remains. Ghost stories bridge that gap. They make the past immediate, intimate, and alive. When someone recounts an encounter in an old fortress or claims to have felt a presence in a ruin, they are not merely describing fear. They are describing connection. This connection is part of what keeps legends alive. Each generation retells them, reshaping the details to fit its own time. What was once a cautionary tale about divine punishment becomes a story about injustice or trauma. What was once believed to be literal haunting becomes a metaphor for guilt or memory. The adaptability of these stories ensures their survival. Castles like Leap, Warwick, and Chillingham are not just preserved as historical landmarks, but as living narratives that evolve with each retelling. Psychologically, these legends also serve as safe spaces for confronting fear. The dread we experience when hearing about a ghostly figure in a dungeon or a spectral queen wandering her execution site allows us to process anxiety in a controlled way. It is fear without danger, tragedy without personal loss. Through these tales, people can explore mortality, morality, and mystery from a place of safety. The experience unites curiosity with empathy, helping us understand the past not through data, but through emotion. The endurance of castle hauntings also speaks to the human fascination with the intersection of beauty and horror. There is something deeply compelling about a structure that once represented safety and power becoming a vessel for pain and remembrance. The contrast between grandeur above and misery below mirrors the contradictions of human society itself. We build monuments to our greatness, but their stones also remember our cruelty. The ghosts that inhabit these spaces are reminders of that duality. They challenge us to see history not as a parade of glory, but as a complex interplay of light and shadow. Culturally, these stories hold a unique place because they blend myth and history seamlessly. A castle like Edinburgh's can host tales of royal intrigue, military conquest, and spectral visitations all at once. The factual and the fictional merge so completely that they become inseparable. This blending satisfies a deep human need for narrative coherence. People prefer a story that feels complete, even if it is terrifying, to one that leaves questions unanswered. The ghosts fill in those gaps, transforming fragmented records into full narratives. Through them, we find continuity between the living and the dead, between history and imagination. It is also worth noting that these legends endure because they carry local identity. Every region, every town with an ancient structure, holds its own stories. They are woven into the fabric of cultural pride and belonging. To speak of the ghost of a particular castle is to speak of the community that surrounds it. The stories become part of shared memory, passed down through generations, binding people to place. Even skeptics who dismiss the supernatural often defend the importance of keeping the legends alive, recognizing them as expressions of collective heritage. In modern tourism, these legends play an essential role. Visitors are drawn not just by the architecture or the artifacts, but by the stories that accompany them. A castle without its ghosts is a building. A castle with its ghosts is an experience. Guides, historians, and storytellers use these tales to animate history, turning static exhibits into living theater. The haunting becomes a form of education, a way to engage the imagination while conveying the moral lessons of the past. In this sense, the ghosts serve both cultural and ethical functions. They preserve memory and provoke reflection. The continued fascination with castle hauntings also reveals a subtle rebellion against the modern world's obsession with certainty. We live in an age where nearly every question can be answered instantly, where mystery is often dismissed as ignorance. Yet the human spirit still hungers for the unknown. Legends of spectral figures and echoing cries offer a reminder that not everything can or should be explained. They preserve the thrill of wonder, the humility of not knowing. In a time when data governs most aspects of life, these stories allow space for imagination and awe. Moreover, the endurance of these tales speaks to humanity's desire to keep dialogue with the dead. Whether through history, art, or legend, we continually seek ways to honor those who came before us. The ghosts of castles symbolize the voices of the forgotten, the prisoners, the betrayed queens, the nameless soldiers. Their stories demand acknowledgement, ensuring that suffering does not vanish into silence. When we tell their tales, we are not simply indulging superstition. We are performing an act of remembrance. There is also a collective comfort in sharing these stories. Around the world, people gather in conversation, on tours, or online to discuss their experiences and favorite legends. The act of storytelling creates community. It allows people from different cultures and backgrounds to find common ground in fascination and fear. The digital era, rather than diminishing this tradition, has amplified it. Platforms that allow users to share videos, photos, and personal accounts of haunted sites have made ghost storytelling a modern folk practice. The comment sections of these posts and videos become virtual campfires, where people gather to exchange reactions, doubts, and personal tales. The relevance of these legends in 2025 also lies in their symbolic power. They reflect the universal tension between progress and memory. As societies modernize, they risk losing touch with their origins. Castles once stood as centers of authority. Now they stand as reminders of both achievement and atrocity. Their ghosts remind us that the past cannot be erased simply by moving forward. The stories endure because they insist that every step into the future must be accompanied by awareness of what came before. Art and literature continue to draw inspiration from these themes. Writers, filmmakers, and musicians reinterpret old hauntings for new audiences, proving that the resonance of these stories never fades. Whether in a period drama, a supernatural thriller, or a historical novel, the essence remains the same: the interplay of human emotion, history, and the unseen. The enduring popularity of such works demonstrates how deeply these narratives align with our collective psyche. They allow modern audiences to experience both the thrill of fear and the depth of empathy, reminding us that ghosts are ultimately reflections of ourselves. In a more personal sense, the draw of these legends lies in what they awaken within each listener or visitor. Standing in a centuries-old corridor, hearing the story of a ghostly figure that once walked there, one feels an undeniable awareness of time's passage. It is a confrontation with mortality, but also with continuity. The stones that witnessed the past still stand. We, too, are temporary travelers through history. This realization brings humility and connection in equal measure. The ghost stories of castles are not simply about the dead. They are about the living who dare to listen. As we move deeper into a world defined by technology and virtual experiences, the enduring fascination with haunted castles serves as a reminder that human beings still crave tangible encounters with the past. We seek not just information but emotion, not just facts but presence. The legends offer that presence in a way few other forms of history can. They turn ruins into storytellers, silence into speech. In this transformation, we find the essence of why they continue to matter. Even skepticism plays a role in their endurance. Doubt keeps the conversation alive, inviting debate, research, and exploration. For every believer who swears to have seen a ghostly figure at Leap Castle, there is a skeptic determined to find a rational explanation. This dynamic ensures that the stories remain relevant. They do not end with belief or disbelief. They thrive in the space between, where imagination and reason coexist. That space is where humanity's richest storytelling has always lived. The legends of haunted castles endure because they offer more than chills or curiosity. They offer meaning. They remind us that history is not just a record of events, but a living dialogue between the past and the present. The ghosts that wander through the corridors of Chillingham, the dungeons of Warwick, or the halls of Edinburgh Castle are not just remnants of superstition. They are symbols of remembrance, caution, and empathy. They tell us that every act of cruelty leaves an echo, every life a trace, and that the human need to remember is stronger than the urge to forget. So as the final echoes of these stories fade into the quiet of the modern night, the question remains: why do we keep returning to them? The answer lies in our own reflection. We are drawn to haunted castles because they allow us to feel connected, to history, to each other, and to the unending mystery of existence itself. Their legends endure because they speak to the most enduring truth of all, that memory, like a spirit, never truly dies. If you have your own story tied to a castle, or if there is a legend that still unsettles or fascinates you, share it. Tell others what drew you to that place or tale. Every story added keeps the conversation alive and the echoes strong. Whether through shared experience, curiosity, or imagination, these legends belong to everyone who listens. They remind us that history is not confined to books or museums. It breathes through stories, through the chill in the air, through the stones that still seem to whisper when night falls and silence take hold.